Hi, and welcome to DNA After Dark. If you're new here, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss a notification or a new episode. Tonight, we have a very special guest, and I'm really excited to do this interview. We have Travis Myers. Travis is a veteran in the Army, retired New York detective, author of the Tommy Keanne book series, and host of the new podcast, Another Nobody. And I must say, I think tonight might be a battle of the accents. You're Boston girl and a New York guy. So we'll see how this goes. But without further ado, let's bring up Travis. Hi, Travis. How are you?
Hey, Danny, how you doing? So nice to see you. Thanks for having me.
Good. I'm so glad you're here. You were introduced by author Tony Wright.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, Tony.
Yeah, Tony is awesome. So I'm super thankful that we were able to connect. And for anybody watching, if you are not familiar with Travis, tune in, stay here, lean back, get a snack, whatnot. We have a lot to talk about. And this will be interactive. So if anybody has any questions as well for Travis, put them in the chat and we will get to it. So before James Watson, is this live? It is live. We are live. So we have a lot to discuss. You have quite a resume. So I want to ask about the podcast. So your podcast is new. It just started in February.
Correct.
So what made you decide to start a podcast?
Well, I'll tell you what, Danny. I never listened to podcasts until I was actually on one for the first time, and I didn't know what they were. They were a new thing, and kind of being a bit of a dinosaur, I just never paid attention to them. And then, of course, when I was a guest on one for the first time, I had to listen to myself to see if I made a fool out of myself. And I really quickly realized that it's a very, very interesting new platform, or whatever the right word is. And I kind of got hooked, to tell you the truth. I started listening to them more and more, crime stuff, news, history, whatever it might be. And as much of a music guy as I like to think I am, now when I'm in the car, I almost always listen to podcasts. I think they're fascinating, they're interesting. What's so good about them too is, I mean, they're free, which is phenomenal, and I can listen to somebody for 5 minutes. If I don't like them, I jump off and I do it again, tune into somebody else. So I really enjoyed that. And then I will have to say what got me into it was I had probably been on maybe a dozen different podcasts at the time. And people would listen and say, you got a good voice, or you have a good attitude, or I like your presence, whatever word you want to use. I think you should do it. And like anything, if you hear it enough times, you start to believe it yourself. And then I started asking people. In fact, there's a guy who I'm pretty sure you're familiar with, Justin Evans of the Generation Y podcast.
Yes.
So I did his show about a year, maybe a year and a half ago, called The Peripheral, which is his kind of sideshow where he actually interviews people.
Yeah.
And I was a guest on his show, and he interviewed me. And then I, didn't talk to him again until maybe I might have saw him at CrimeCon, which we're all familiar. Well, we're not all familiar with it. Maybe not all your listeners are, but you and I are, and a lot of the crime people are familiar with that. And, we got to be a little bit more friendly there. And then I hit him up and I said, hey, man, I'm kind of thinking about this. What do you think? And he had a very interesting answer to me. He said, Travis, he says, the market is oversaturated. He said, everybody and their brother has a true crime podcast or a podcast to begin with. And, every washed up actor or politician, everybody's doing it now, and they're doing it and doing it. He says, so to tell you the truth, if it was anybody else, I would say no. He says, but you are such a character. I would tell you to do it, And he actually kind of, I don't know, if mentoring is the right word, he gave me a lot of advice.
That's awesome.
And I followed it. And so far, it's been, we're only like 10 episodes in, so about 10 weeks in now, something like that.
Yeah.
It's been a really nice ride so far. And I find it really, really interesting. So,
how did you come up with the name Another Nobody?
I did that because, you kind of bounce names around in your head. What are you going to do, right? But I kind of quite often, whenever I'm giving advice, I always give the disclaimer, well, but who am I? Who am I to tell you? I'm another nobody. I'm a nobody, right? And in real life, I am. In real life, we all are. But when I say that, I don't mean it disparagingly. If you look at all these people on television that think they're so important, well, in real life, what have they ever done for anybody?
Mm-hmm.
Or big sports stars. You might like them when you're watching them on their team or they're making millions throwing balls around, but in real life, who are they? They're nobodies. In real life, to you, do they really help Danny in the end? No. The people that should be important to you, that should be important to all of us, are the ones that sit around your kitchen table every night.
Right.
And that's the way I look at it. It's kind of like an outlook on life that I have. And so for me, yes, I am the nobody. I'm just another nobody on all of these millions of podcasts that you could pick. I'm another nobody. And if you want to listen to me, great. I'd like to send some nonsense your way, and that's,
or as you say, do the right thing. Hit
do the right
like
thing. That's right. I see you've tuned in once or twice.
Once or twice, or all of them. I listened to all of them.
All of them?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
When we connected, I binged everything I could find.
Oh,
I feel like I know you so well.
That's so nice. Well, thank you so much, Danny. Thank you very much.
But with that being said, the audience doesn't know or hopefully people do, because hopefully people have checked out your podcast. But transitioning from that, I know you talk a little bit about it on your show and some other interviews you've done, but let's go back. So you are New York born and raised, and then you became a detective in the 90s. So how did you end up becoming a detective? Was that something you always wanted to do, or how did that happen?
Well, as a New York City kid, all right, and growing up in a pretty working class. So I grew up in the Yorkville section of Manhattan, which is, well, we grew up in a few different neighborhoods, but our teenage years were predominantly in Yorkville, okay, which is the East 80s and 90s for people that don't know. And so people immediately think the Upper East Side, and they think of Park Avenue and Fifth Avenue. Well, we were the kids that were. Have you ever heard the saying, the other side of the tracks?
Yeah.
Well, that comes from New York City, because decades ago, there was an L. An L is an elevated train, okay? So it's a subway that's above ground that ran up 3rd Avenue, okay? And so all of those people that you know from Fifth Avenue, Madison Avenue, Park Avenue, all the biggest money people in the world live on that side of the tracks. Mm. And then once you cross the 3rd Avenue, you cross the tracks to 1st, 2nd, 3rd Avenue, okay? That was the other side of the tracks. Literally, that's where it comes from. And that's where we grew up. And we were all, working class kids. All of our fathers were. Our dream was to have a union job. Okay, so you had 2 routes in my neighborhood. Everybody was working class. Our parents were cab drivers and truck drivers and cops and firemen and carpenters and every other thing. And so you tried to find yourself a union job and or a civil service job. I went to Julia Richmond High School, which was one of the worst performing at the time, was one of the worst performing high schools in New York City. It doesn't exist anymore. And I dropped out at the age of 15 in the 9th grade, just after finishing up the 9th grade. And I worked on a construction site, because back then you could get away with that back then. I worked in a liquor store. I worked in a couple of bars, just different things, washing dishes and things like that. I wasn't behind the bar, obviously. Mm-hmm. And then at 17, both my brother, who also had dropped out of high school, and myself went into the Army. And we both became paratroopers with the 82nd Airborne Division, if you're familiar. And then, so the question is, how did I become a police officer? Well, again, it was just a choice that most of the kids in our neighborhood would make. Was you became an iron worker, or you went into the 580, which is 580 union, or you went into the 32B union, where you were a doorman, or a maintenance man in somebody's building. Or you took a civil service exam, and we took all of them. I took the fire test. I took the police test. I took the court officer's exam. I took a building inspector's exam. I just took all the tests, and the police department was the first one to call me. And yes, I did. That was the one that I wanted the most, and that's the one that I got.
Oh, good.
And as far as being a detective, you're obviously a cop before you're a detective. Now, as a young man, we never disliked the police, but we didn't have necessarily a great love for the police, because we were street kids who would be told to get off the corner, and they take our beer away, or pat you down every once in a while, and you had your occasional run-ins with the law. But the detectives, when they showed up with their sport jackets and their ties and their pinky rings and gave a, "Hey kid, come on over here, I got a question for you," those were the coolest guys ever. And that's what I wanted to be. And luckily, in the end, that's what I ended up being. Just like my brother did. My brother Henry was a detective he was a police officer for, I don't know, 21, 22 years. And most of that time a detective. So
nice. We have in the chat, Matilda just subscribed to your podcast.
Hey, Matilda, how you doing? That's so cool. It comes up in the corner. I see that. Very cool.
And then Mr. Beckham. So Mr. Beckham is my co-host on the weekend show when we recap true crime. And he's also a sports guy. He wants to know Yankees, Mets, Giants, or Jets.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm sorry to disappoint you. I am not a sports fan. All right.
Me too.
Don't hold it against me. Don't hold it against me. So my mother was a huge sports fan. She was Yankees and Jets. So our house was Yankees and Jets, and occasionally Giants. So she was a little fickle. She would go as far as football, with whoever was winning at the time. But other than that, strictly Yankees. And just like my brother Henry, he's a big Yankees fan too. But for me, I could care less. I kind of go with the old. Did you ever see the movie A Bronx Tale?
Yeah.
So you remember the boss, Sonny, Chaz Palminteri, and I don't know, he says to Cologio, the young kid, he says, "What do you care about them? You think they care about you?" And I kind of always had the same attitude, And in fact, when I was a cop in the Bronx, a detective in the Bronx where I worked, which is where the Yankees play. I used to get so angry when they did well, because they would go into the playoffs, and I'd have to get sent down to Yankee Stadium to guard your car when you went to, I'd be like 3-4 blocks away from the stadium, making sure nobody got broke into your car. And I used to hate that. So no, I was not a sports fan, at all.
Mr. Beckham will be disappointed. I'm sure I'll get a message from him.
I'm sorry, Mr. Beckham. Don't hold it against me.
How could you be from New York and not like sports? So let's go back to you being a detective in the 90s. Was there a special, I don't know what the right word is, but what was most of your career as a detective built? Like, what type of cases were you typically working?
Predominantly for myself, I was almost strictly narcotics. I worked in the Bronx Narcotics Division. All right. And in fact, I used to laugh, not laugh. It was a joke of mine. I enjoyed narcotics so much. I used to say for your friend Beckham, I was NFL, narcotics for life. All right. And I enjoyed doing narcotics work very much. And I had done that at the precinct level. In New York City is and especially back then, it's the largest police department in the world. People don't know that. And so there's lots of different things you can do. And I was on a narcotics team in the precinct level before I went into anti-crime, which is another unit. And then after that, I went to Bronx Narcotics, where I stayed until I was injured, and then left. I was forced off the job, about halfway through my career. So,
So what was like the day-to-day like for you working narcotics? You might not be able to even give a day-to-day or week-to-week.
For the most part in narcotics, we do things called buy and bust operations. That's the meat and potatoes of the work. And we'll go out in the street, we'll have a team of, like 6 people, and plus a couple of undercovers. And we'll go out, and the undercovers will make buys, and then we'll jump out of the cars and lock up all the bad guys, right? All the sellers. And in the Bronx, especially in the 90s, I mean, it was not unheard of to be able to go out in a night and pick up 15 guys, lock up 15 people a night. Okay. Then you'll take these people and try to get information off of them to lead you to bigger buys and therefore bigger arrests, and build what we call a case. And so when you build a case off of somebody, then we'll get, undercovers to go back and to try to buy in to these different gangs, because that's what they are. They're drug gangs, organizations. It's very much is organized crime. In fact, our brass on our collars was our division was OCCB, which is the Organized Crime Control Bureau. So if I say organized crime, immediately people go right to the mafia. That's the only thing that they think of. But it is organized. Drug dealing is organized crime. And so our goal was always to get deeper into these organizations as much as possible. And so, yes, we'd set up cases, and our undercovers would make better buys and bigger buys. And soon it'd go from, 5 or 6 or 10 bags, a couple $100 on the street to a couple of $1,000s on the street. Next thing you know, you might be doing tens of thousands of dollars, and then throw a couple of guns in there if you can, because that makes the judges really mad, and really seals the fate of the people that you're buying into. And then on occasion, and I don't want to go too fast for you, but on occasion,
Go ahead.
we'd have giant operations where I might be working, or my team might be working one particular gang, but that it's just a how could I say it? Kind of like a tentacle of the octopus, where there could literally be a giant organization. I don't know anything about the rest of the investigations that are going on, but I'm attached to it. And then in one fell swoop on a particular day or a weekend, you literally can lock up 100 people. But I'm only locking up 10 of those 100 people, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, it does.
Okay. So, and I hope I answered your question.
You did. I didn't realize I guess there were so many moving parts to it. Was there any
a lot of stuff? There's a lot of stuff that goes on into that. Absolutely. So.
Were there any drug busts that you did that became known to the public that we might have heard of, or were they all pretty much just local to New York?
It's a funny thing about the Bronx, okay, in particular, is the Bronx is kind of like a lost borough in that, really, it's sad because people don't realize. So are you a Boston girl or just a Massachusetts girl?
Boston.
So Boston has about 500,000 people, right? Mm-hmm. The Bronx by itself has about 150,000 people.
Wow.
Okay. So it's 3 times bigger than Boston. The Bronx itself is the size of Philadelphia. Okay. Mm. Now, years ago, I remember reading this in the paper, and it broke my heart because I'm a big fan of the Bronx, even though there's, it has quite a few shortcomings, I guess I could say. The last bookstore in the Bronx closed. So can you imagine now having this giant city upon itself of 150,000 people that doesn't have a single bookstore? That was down to one movie theater at the time. Things may have changed. This was years ago I'm talking about, okay? But it is a sad place. And really awful crimes happen every day that never make the paper, that never make the news, that are never in magazines, where somebody could stub their toe in Central Park in Manhattan, it's going to make the paper. Something happens down there, it's going to make the paper. And in the Bronx, it simply doesn't. So as far as if you want famous cases, we were attached to one where it was one of those larger, I wish I can think of the name of it. Unfortunately, I can't. It was a case that had a name. It was an operation, if you will. And it was predominantly done in housing projects. And it was one of those things where, literally we locked up over 100 people that day. And yes, it did make the papers. But for the most part, sadly, murders, rapes, serial murders, all kinds of rotten, horrible things happen in the Bronx. And it never makes the paper. It just doesn't. So, or the news.
That's horrible.
Well, that's why I call it the forgotten borough, because people just don't care about it. Yeah. And it's sad.
We have a comment from Karen. Hi, Danny. Travis seems like a really nice man. Travis is so down to earth. Sending you both much love.
Thank you, Karen. That's so
Karen's
nice.
from Australia.
From Australia?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. That's exciting. We actually have some fans in Australia that have written to us before, which is nice.
Oh, nice.
That is a cool thing. That is a cool thing about this writing, and back to the thing, how I'm a bit of a dinosaur, I don't realize how cool things are. The first time we started getting fan mail, we got stuff from Australia, from Ireland, from England. I have a young woman that writes to me all the time on Instagram from the Netherlands. She reads all the books and she comments and posts all the books, and it's fascinating to me. It really is. It's
That's
very, very
awesome.
cool.
That's so cool. Thank you, Karen. And Matilda agrees as well.
Matilda, I'm sorry, I missed that. Matilda too. Cool.
So one of the things that you mentioned in an interview that I heard was you referred to something called a Bronx jury. Can
Yes.
you explain what that is? Because I've never heard of that until you said that.
It's funny. After saying that, and I can't remember what podcast that were. That came up one time in a thing, and we talked about it. And so a Bronx jury basically means it's so anti-police and or anti-establishment. That the anti-government, anti-district attorney's office. You're never going to win this case because the jury is going to be against you immediately, no matter what, regardless of the facts. And it's actually a term used quite often in New York, but now it's become a term that's used across the country by different lawyers. And give me a second. Let me just draw my memory. So I was very curious where it came from, because once I had discussed this and it was brought to me, nobody had an answer. And I would ask my district attorney friends, I'd ask other cop friends, I'd ask, intelligent readers like yourself, where it turns out it comes from a book that was very popular in the 70s or 80s that they made a movie about called The Bonfire of the Vanities. Have you ever heard of that?
No, I haven't.
The Bonfire of the Vanities was a very popular book that turned into a movie. And the way it was described to me is they wanted to have a change of venue. Okay. So they wanted to move a court case out of Manhattan and into the Bronx so that they could get a Bronx jury.
Interesting.
And that's where that famous line came from, that became famous in our world, because the whole idea is if you have a Bronx jury, it would be biased against the establishment, you see. And that's how it is. So.
Oh man. We have a Couch Studios. Welcome, Danny. Loving this episode. Big Tommy Keanne fan. Travis, how many more books? So this is jumping a little ahead, but let's do it. Travis, How many more books will there be in the series? There's a 6th one coming. We saw the sneak peek. How many more?
Okay, Miss Studios. We currently have planned for Detective Tommy Keanne in the precinct that he works, a total of 10 books. So there will be 5. There's 5 out right now. So there'll be 5 more on the way. Okay. And we had no idea when we got mixed up with the first one, Sister Margaret, which came out in 2020. With that one, me and my sister, I write these with my sister Natasha, and we didn't know what we were doing, either one of us. We did it kind of as a goof. All right. And when we took it on, again, I had this idea. She had written a couple of romance novels, and I had this idea to do it, but I'm a very bright guy, but when it comes to the technicalities of writing a book, I'm inexperienced. I had no clue how to do it, and she was the smart one. So I gave her a call and I said, "Hey, Tosh, what do you think about this idea?" And I didn't finish that sentence before she said, "I'm in. Let's do it." Okay.
Awesome.
And I wrote her, I don't know, about a 200-page sentence, just a run-on sentence that I wrote her, which was the beginning of Sister Margaret. And we bounced that back and forth for a couple of months until we had what we liked. And we gave it a shot. And then we ended up getting picked up, and we put out a 2nd book and a 3rd book and a 4th book and now a 5th book. And it became a thing. And so we didn't really know where we were going, or that it would be popular, or that we'd have so many readers, and now we do. And so what we kind of decided was, Tommy, if for our readers out there who know but who don't know, this series is based on his 19th year. It's his last year until retirement. Okay. Now, many people go on for 25, 30 years, 35 years on the job. I know guys who've stayed on for a very, very long time. But we kind of decided that we would, if people keep reading them, we'll keep writing them. Okay. So right now we're going to run till 10. Okay. And then he will, because the story is already put together. It's sketched out. Okay. And I don't want to ruin it for anybody.
Yes.
But then if people still love him and want him, he'll become a private detective, in which case he can go anywhere in the world and do anything that he wants. And if it turns out we do 10 books and it's not that popular anymore, you know, he'll just kind of, you know, hang up the old pistol belt and put his shield in the drawer next to his bed, and it'll be over. So we'll see how it goes. But so far, people like him. And if like I say, if people keep reading them, if you read them, we will write them. We have plenty of stuff to talk about. So
cool. Shout out to one of my best friends, Liz, known here as the Liz. She just got in the mail today, Sister Margaret, Tommy Keanne.
Oh, we love to hear that. Thank you, Liz. Thank you very much.
I'm hoping she'll pop up. I told her to pop in the chat if she can, but we'll see, you know, mom life. So, but I told her I would mention her. So that is awesome. So thank you, Couch Studios. That is a great question. I didn't know that. Cool. So when is the 6th one coming out?
The 6th one will be out this year. And I want to say a lot of this stuff is out of our hands. So bear with me, people. If I say anything, I might be wrong. Okay. But we are hoping to have both the 6th and the 7th one out this year. The 6th one we hope to have around June, July. Okay. And then the 7th one will be holiday season. But if we're lucky, we'll have pre-sales available at CrimeCon in September, because our CrimeCon fans love that. And that's what we did last year with book number 5. We were able to get a box of them before, like a month before it came out. So everybody that went to CrimeCon was able to get to buy the book there, which they loved, you know, because they buy it, we sign it, and it's a great thing, you know. And it's fun because you're a month ahead of the game, you know.
Yeah.
So they really enjoyed that.
So going to CrimeCon, I know when we messaged, it's like, I know I met you last year at CrimeCon. Like this, when I heard your accent, when we started emailing, and I was like, I know I met him, just like not formally. But how long have you been going to CrimeCon, and how has your experience been doing that?
Well, we absolutely love it. We think this is the best game in town for what we do. Now, it's funny, we went to the first one, was Orlando, which I believe was your first one too, correct?
Yeah, that was 2 years ago. Yeah.
Years ago. That was our first one. And we didn't know what to expect. It was our 3rd book had just come out. And Jenny Black, that's the name of that one. That one had just come out. And we went there, and, you know, you don't know what to expect. We know people were writing, and we know we're selling books, but we never really met with our fans in that manner. And well, we sold well over 200 books. We would, on occasion, because, you know, they have the panels, and then when the panels retire, you know, boom, 500 people walk into the room, you know, and we're selling books and signing books and shaking hands and taking pictures. And it was really, really exciting. So the following year, all right, we were supposed to go to, it was the same weekend in New York. Oh, gee, Thriller Fest. Thriller Fest is a really big book festival that they have in New York City every year. And I'm right here. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, we're definitely going to go to that. We had it all scheduled up, set up, ready to go. And then CrimeCon got announced in Nashville. And I got on the phone with my sister, and I said, Natasha, I think we should go to CrimeCon because those are our people. She agreed, and we went down to Nashville, and it was even better and bigger for us than Orlando was, because it was our second time doing it, you know, and we had more fans, and we have a really good bunch of girls. They call themselves the CrimeCon Girl Gang. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
No, who are they?
They all had Tommy Keanne t-shirts on, and you know, they swarm us. And I don't know exactly, because they will come in groups at a different time. So there's like 15 of these girls that show up, and they're wonderful, and you meet more people, and back to the thing where you don't realize what you're doing, like with our friends that just wrote in from Australia. I would meet people who come from all over the world who actually know who we are. And it blows my mind, because how in the world does somebody from Australia or Ireland have a clue who I am? But they do. We had a nice, funny story from the first year. I'll back it up a little bit to Orlando.
Yes.
We had a mother and daughter pair that came up, because if you're familiar with CrimeCon, it's predominantly women, and there's a lot of them are mother, daughter, cousins, family. They make a trip out of it,
Mm-hmm.
And so this very nice mother-daughter pair came up to us, and they're like, "Oh, we love everything about you guys. We're such big fans." And I can't help it. It's the city kid in me, I'm very skeptical. I'm thinking in the back of my head, "Yeah, you're full of shit, lady." I don't want to. I'm not going to say that. I'm being very polite to her, but she didn't buy the first 2 books because she had already read them. She was so excited to get her hands on Jenny Black, which was the 3rd book, and then I was ashamed of myself, of course, inside my head, because nothing came out of my mouth yet, And I was like, "Oh, she does know us." And I'm like, as soon as she walks by, I said, "Tosh, can you believe they really know us?" And it was just such a cool experience.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we're 100% sold on CrimeCon, but I'm hoping it's not going to go. The next one we go to, is it going to be in Vegas or California? Because I can't drive that far. I have to drive, and I'm not going to drive to California. So, and when I say I have to drive, because I have to bring all the stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it seems like from kind of studying their history, it seems like they kind of remap and go to where they've gone before.
Right.
So, which would mean Vegas would be soon.
I've heard that as a rumor. They don't announce
until that weekend.
Exactly. But even Vegas is a big trip for me, so I don't know. That's
driving there.
I was 50-50 on Denver until I did all the math, but I have to drive because I have to bring the stuff. People will tell you, "We'll ship it." I said, "It'll cost me thousands to ship this."
Right.
So we'll see. We'll see.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I'm that person that comes back from CrimeCon and my luggage is so heavy because I buy a lot of books. I'm like a self-proclaimed book nerd, so my luggage is always very heavy when I leave. But I'm excited that you're going to be at CrimeCon this year. That's amazing. Yeah. There's something, I don't know if you've heard of, it's called the True Crime Podcast Festival. It's going to be here it says Boston, but it's really Danvers. And that's going to be this July. So
it's funny that you say that, because it may have been since I started following you after you were kind enough to invite me onto your show. And I think you had posted something about that. And I may have a horror convention, our first ever horror convention that we're going to go to. Mm-hmm. And I think it's in New Hampshire, funny enough, which is right next to where you guys are.
Yeah.
And I can't think of what the name of that is right now, but we decided to try that. It'll be our first one ever. But we've noticed from CrimeCon that a lot of our true crime fans hold hands with the horror world. It's a very hand-in-hand relationship there. So we thought, and if we turn out to be the only true crime people at a horror convention, it may be very good for us. But yeah. I was a little disappointed because I don't see enough of these kind of get-togethers. Personally, I think there should be more.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's cool that you're going. Yeah, New Hampshire's right over the border for me. Yeah. So
Monster Fest, they call it. Monster Fest.
Monster Fest.
I know the guy is from Massachusetts. He does one in Massachusetts too, but this one's in New Hampshire.
So. Well, that'll be exciting.
But I'm definitely going to keep that on my radar and definitely show up next year for sure.
Yes. This will be my first year doing the True Crime Podcast Festival. So I'm excited.
Is it its first year or
no? They last year I guess was in Denver.
Really?
But I just heard about it this year, and
so it's another moving festival that bounces around then.
Yep. Yeah. So yeah, it's going to be here, Boston this year, and then I don't know where it will be next year. But I was like, okay, it's in my state. I have to try to go.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. So one of the things that just to jump back to your, the career that you did, because I mean, we could probably talk for hours and hours and hours, but what I kind of took away from some of the interviews that you did, and listening to it, I was like outraged, but then I'm like, oh my gosh, what Travis is saying, it really makes a lot of sense in regards to politics being involved in the cases that happen, not letting cops do their jobs.
Yes.
Can you speak a little bit about what that means for someone who, like me, did not know until I listened to you explain it very eloquently on a previous
Yes.
podcast?
Well, I absolutely will. And again, this is something that we could do an entire show just about this. Okay. And for your listeners, so everybody knows, when it comes to politics, I, for the most part, am fiercely independent. I like nothing about politics or politicians or the government as a whole, because unfortunately, they never do what they're supposed to do, be them on the left and or the right. Okay. And now for us in policing, quite often, for the most part, okay, everybody gets into this because they really do want to do the right thing. They want to get bad guys. They want to keep people safe. They want to, for lack of they want to stand on the side of right. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
But there'll be, and again, I don't know exactly what angle you're getting at or where you'd like me to go, but there are so many things that do get in the way politically. All right. And when I say politically, within the police department, because there are, geez, where do I want to go with this?
The floor is yours, so we can
exactly.
go anywhere. Where I was thinking was in regards to, if people say, why isn't that cop, we're seeing a drug bust right in front of him, why isn't he doing anything? Or, you get it to an arrest, and then it goes to court, and then
there's a very good answer to that. All right. Especially in my time. Now, granted, we're going to go back 25, 30 years. Okay. But what people don't understand is how many different things have to happen in the course of a day. So a patrol officer, the guy that you'll see riding around in a car, or in New York City, still a foot patrol, because we still have foot patrols in New York City, a guy that walks the beat. Okay. He, for the most part, is chained to the radio. He has to answer the radio. All right. And so in a busy house, so in New York City, we have A houses, B houses, and C houses. The A house is the busiest house. So if you are a patrol guy, let's say it's me and you, and we're out on patrol and we're in uniform, okay, and we got our 8.5-hour shift that we're going to work. In that 8.5-hour period, okay, on a busy night, on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday night, when things are hopping, you might get 25 jobs, possibly 30 jobs. I mean, you're going job. You might not be allowed to take meal. You might get no lunch, because one, either you have a backlog of 5 waiting. So I'm going to go on this particular job, but I got 5 more jobs waiting for me in my sector, which is my little area that my car is assigned, that I have to get to. And they may not be necessarily what we call heavy jobs. It's not a gun run. It's not a lost child. It's not a dispute with a knife, something like this. Mm-hmm. But you have to answer them. If the public calls, you must go to these jobs, okay? And you'll go from job to job to job to job. And many of them will be unfounded. That means nothing really happened, okay? It could be a noise complaint. It could be a domestic dispute. And when I say domestic dispute, I don't mean a man's beating his wife. It's an argument, but somebody calls and you have to show up. You have all of these. Then you have the heavy ones that you have to go to, okay? So if you see the guy that's on the corner, or you see a car that's driving by, and there's literally a hand-to-hand going on, a drug deal going on, okay? That's, again, cop vernacular, hand-to-hand, okay, going on. No, they don't have time to stop. You and I, again, we don't have time to stop for this nonsense. And it's not that it's not nonsense. It's not that it's not against the law. But if I stop for this particular small, crime in the big scheme of things, okay, and then I'm taken out of service, that car is now gone, and we're only turning out 5 cars that night. Those other 4 cars are going to have to pick up the 15 jobs that we don't go to while we're out of service. It's a manpower thing. And it's not that people don't want to do it. It's that they can't do it. Okay. Because of that, and because of corruption issues, patrol, uniformed guys, okay, and this is for most large municipalities, I'm sure Boston's very much the same, okay, it is drug arrests in general are looked down upon for patrol to handle. One, because of everybody's always so paranoid about corruption that they don't want uniformed officers touching narcotics, touching the money, touching everything else that goes along with that. All right. So it's dirty work, so to speak. Okay. And then it is, again, being taken out of service because now patrol only has, 15 guys working that night. And now they have 13 guys. You see, you've done that. And imagine now that happens again, or somebody has to make an arrest because it's a serious crime. Well, now you're down to 12 guys or 11 guys. Okay. And all of a sudden now serious jobs start happening. Who's going to answer? Or the backlog gets so large that you're not going to make it through your evening. You simply can't answer all the jobs. And people don't understand that. Now, funny enough, I don't want to jump ahead, but to give you an idea, when I was in SNU is a street narcotics enforcement unit. Okay. And in SNU was a precinct level narcotics team. And we worked in an A house in the Bronx, and we actually had two. Some precincts have no SNU teams. Some precincts have one. We had so much drugs in my precinct, we had two teams. Okay. And that would work opposite days. All right. And I would, for the most part, it was observed drug sales. So we would go up on the roofs and watch with binoculars, and then me and my partner would be up there on the roof, and I'd say, okay, Danny, you see that guy right there with the black jacket and the white sweatpants? Him, grab him. And that's how we would do it. Okay. I'm going to say probably a dozen times I've seen uniformed guys on the corner or a uniformed car go to another job right there, and the drug dealers didn't move. They kept selling right there. They wouldn't do it in front of the guy's face, but they would quite often actually do it right behind their backs and smile and laugh as they did it because they weren't afraid of the guy in uniform. They were afraid of us in plain clothes. So when you saw, my lily white face and my short haircut jump out of the car in blue jeans and sneakers, they took off like a shot because they knew the narcotics guys were around, or the anti-crime guys. Again, anti-crime guys now, for the most part, are plain clothes, dressed just like you and me are right now, regular street clothes. When I say plain clothes, there's no jackets and ties. You're in T-shirts and sweatshirts and sneakers and boots, And for anti-crime, all we did was we looked for gun arrests and we looked for robberies. That's pretty much was the bulk of, that was the meat and potato of our job. Now, that being said, I left SNU to go to anti-crime, and I'm in the same precinct, okay? But now that I'm in the anti-crime, I'd roll up in, I know these two fellas on the corner because I locked them up a dozen times when I was in SNU. I'd grab them, I'd toss them. If they didn't have a gun on them, I'd take the drugs, I'd throw it in the sewer, I'd say, have a nice day. Because I'm not out there to make drug arrests anymore. I'm there to make serious felonies for guns and narcotics. And if I take this kid back because I got 10 bags of crack in his pocket, okay, and then there's robberies going on, who's going to attend to the robberies?
Right.
You see? And people don't get that. They just think, they see the police department as a monolith. And it really isn't. There's whatever you said before about moving parts, there's so many different things going on. And, street crime, which unfortunately, and back to the politics of things, okay, we had probably the worst mayor in our lifetime was Bill de Blasio. Okay, when Bill de Blasio came in, he decimated the New York City Police Department, one of the greatest police departments in the world, and that's not arguable. People say, "Oh, arguably," no. New York City Police Department is a phenomenal police department in so many, many ways. Okay, but he took SNU away. There's no more SNOO teams. He took anti-crime away. There's no more anti-crime teams. He took street crime away. Street crime was citywide anti-crime. Okay. In fact, on the Another Nobody podcast tomorrow, my friend Jody Almodovar is going to be on there, and he was a street crime officer. Okay. And they would go all over the city, all over New York City. They could go anywhere. But what they would do is wherever the precincts had the worst crime, they would go there for 15 days. And all they did were gun arrests. That was it. They locked up people with guns all day, all night, because they would work only in the nighttime. Okay. And all night they would search guys for guns all night long. And they would get, whatever your job is, you learn how to do it and you get good at it. Okay. And if you can take 5 in 15 days, if you can make 5 gun arrests, homicides are going to go down. They're going to go down. Robberies are going to go down, because even in a place like the Bronx, 90% of the people are really good people, are hardworking people who want to do I don't know what the worst neighborhood in Boston is, but I promise you, in the worst neighborhood in Boston, most of the people are decent people.
Yeah. The
only thing is, what happens with poverty is that you end up with a larger percentage of assholes. All right. And those assholes ruin it for everybody else.
Right.
Because those are the ones that are fooling around with drugs. Those are the ones that just don't care about human life or humanity at all. And we can go into a whole bunch of social reasons why. But in the end, the police officer is not a social worker. He's the guy that comes when it's the worst. He's the guy that comes after it's already happened, because the parents failed, the school system failed, the social workers failed, the system has failed these people again and again and again and again and again, and we're there to clean up the mess. And that's a sad reality of it. It's, and things like these things we've talked about, and I've talked so much, I want to let you get some questions in, but things
please keep going.
things like anti-crime, street crime, SNOO, narcotics, all of these different units are proactive policing. You see, they're not the reactive policing, which patrol is. And so the thing of it is that patrol, sadly, okay, because of the nature of the beast, they're coming when you call them. Once you've called them, it's already happened.
Right.
You are now officially a victim. By the time you dial 911, it's because you're a victim. If street crime or anti-crime or any one of the narcotics outfit organizations had snatched that fucker off the street before he victimized you, that's proactive policing. And that's what people can't get in their head, unfortunately. And that's where the politics, okay, with the anti-police movement, the defund the police movement, all this nonsense that's been going on for like the last 10 or 15 years. Thank God after my time, okay? Because under Mayor Giuliani, we were very, very, Mayor Giuliani and Bratton and all the different people that we work for, but, policing was very proactive. And I think I answered your question about the politics there for sure, I hope.
Yeah, there was one thing I want to touch upon that. James Watts. So James is from Canada, and he says that's why defunding the police is such bullshit.
Damn straight, James. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Yeah,
one of the things that that you had said in a previous podcast was that, let's see, when there was about 2,600 a year in regards to homicides, but then when Giuliani came in, it went down to 600 approximately. Correct. Is that correct?
Correct.
So why is that? So what did Giuliani do that was different than the previous mayors?
Okay. I'm going to give you a long answer again. I'm sorry.
No, please go ahead. It's important.
So to go back historically in New York City, all right, 1969 was the first year ever, okay? 1969 was the first year ever that New York City broke 1,000 for homicides, all right? And granted, it is the biggest city population-wise in the country, okay? But 1,000 people dead is a lot of people to have dead, okay? Every year, okay, since 1969 until I'm going to say, let's say 1994. Okay. 93, 94. It went up. It ticked up. It ticked up. It ticked up. And then, so every year it went up and never went down again. Then in the end of the 80s, of course, we got hit with crack. And crack, everything went bananas, absolutely nutsy cuckoo. The drugs were everywhere, the crackheads were everywhere, and the violence just rose. It just exploded. And we ended up with that, I want to say, I can't remember what the exact number was, but it was about 2,500. You're right, wherever it was, right in that neighborhood. Okay. So Mayor Giuliani came in. And Mayor Giuliani, yes, hired a
Not from Boston.
hired a fella from Boston, okay, named James Bratton. And Bratton came up and became our police commissioner. They did so many really interesting things. At the time, New York City had 3 different police departments. We had the New York City Police Department. We had the Transit Department, which only worked in the subways. We had the Housing Department, which only worked in housing projects, okay? He combined the 3 of them. So now you don't have 3 different things going on. Everybody's on the same sheet of music, okay? Together, they created a thing. When I say together, Giuliani gets the credit because he was the guy who orchestrated everything, okay? But it was the bosses that he put in place, okay? Bratton being one of the main ones, but all those bosses were very proactive guys. And they invented a thing called CompStat, okay? In CompStat, what they would do is every month they'd get together, all right? Actually, I think it was weekly and monthly, and I'm not sure exactly how it was because I wasn't a boss. But all the captains, all the precinct commanders would get together, all right? And they would go over all the statistics. And so if you, Danny, were a captain of whatever precinct and you were having a problem, you better have an answer for this problem and what you're going to do to fix it. Something they had never done before. You see? Before, what did our good friend Billy Joel sing in that song, Miami 2024, or whatever the name of that song was, about the Bronx? Well, it always burned up there before. Nobody cared, you see? But now everybody cared, and everybody had to care because he put the finger on them. And so it was a top-down thing where the bosses said, well, look, I can't have this crime anymore, or they're going to replace me, Mm-hmm. And then he also allowed police officers to do their job. And what do I mean by that? Well, he would set up different initiatives. The biggest problem always in every municipality comes down to drugs. Drugs is the foundation. Just like when you're building a house or a building, you have to have a strong foundation. The mm-hmm. foundation of crime, the foundation of the problems that we have in all these big cities are drugs. Drugs is what makes people crazy to begin with. If you're a junkie, you're going to do more burglaries, or robberies, or rapes, or more prostitution, or more, because it degenerates society so much. Okay, and if you lived on a very nice block in one building, one apartment in one building becomes a drug spot, your block is going to go down. Now, if you have one open up on the other end of the block, and now you have 2 drug spots on your block, oh man, you're going to have a world of problems on your block. All right. It's a cancer, and it grows and it grows and it metastasizes and grows until it's completely out of control. And so what they did with this CompStat thing and things like the aforementioned street crime unit, who would only come to your precinct for 15 days and they would leave. Okay. Having not a SNU team, but like my precinct did, had 2 SNU teams. Well, you're doubling up on getting all the bad guys, the drug dealers, okay? And that's on top of what narcotics is doing with the bigger cases on their own. So you literally have 3 or 4 drug teams now working your precinct, okay? And yes, it does result in more incarceration, which gets a lot of people upset. We shouldn't be locking up everybody. But if they're doing wrong, what are you going to do with them? You have to stop it. You have to stop the bleeding. And Mayor Giuliani and Bill Bratton and all these other bosses that were in it at the time, they technically, okay, because it was us, it was the soldiers, it was the guys on the street that did the work. All right. I give them all the credit in the world for allowing us to do the work, but we still had to do the work personally. Okay. But when you know that you're free to do the work, okay, the work will get done. When you're encouraged to do the work and rewarded for doing the work. And, when I say rewarded, it's you're not demonized anymore for doing the work. You will do the work because this is why people take this job, to do good, and the next thing you know, it gets better. And I'll leave you for the next question after this one thing. So when politically people want to demonize Rudy Giuliani because of this whole left-right nonsense that goes on in this country, okay, which I will not be a part of, all right? But what they don't realize is that Mayor Giuliani was absolutely the best thing that ever happened to New York City at the time, okay? And by fixing crime the way no other mayor had done for 30 years before him, no other mayor was able to do this, all right? He literally probably saved between 20 and 30,000 lives.
Wow.
If you do the math of the literal
That's
lives,
incredible.
The literal lives that were saved at the time, and then all of the lives that were saved after he left because these programs stayed in place. Like right now in New York City, crime is on the rise. It's going up and it's getting worse. It's nowhere near the levels that we knew as kids growing up in the 70s and 80s. It's nowhere near those levels yet. But why would you let it get worse at all?
Right.
They fixed it. Keep it down. Don't let it go back. Why would you let it slip back? And then if you want to put some kind of awful racist tinge to Mayor Giuliani and Bill Bratton and all the things that they did, I really want you to get this in your head, okay? All those lives that were saved, those thousands and thousands of lives that were saved, literally a year when it was happening, but then the aftermath too, or the after effects that last for years and years, okay? Those were not the nice white faces that lived on the Upper West Side, the Upper East Side, Astoria, Queens, the nice neighborhoods. These were all the black and brown people who lived in the worst neighborhoods. Those are the lives that were saved. Those were the mothers and fathers and aunts and uncles who helped to raise the children who are there today. Okay. And that is a simple fact. That's a fact, period. I'm not sugarcoating it. I'm not making it nice. These are numbers, and the numbers don't lie. And, okay, again, I keep saying I'm going to give you a chance, but let me put this.
No, please. This is amazing information.
And, okay, at that same point there, and I kind of lost track of myself. I put too many ands in there. What was I going to say about that? Oh, damn it. What was I going to say? After saving all those lives, oh, screw me. I can't remember now. I'm sorry, honey. Go ahead. If it comes to me, I'll interject.
Awesome. No, this is, like I said, when I heard you talk about it on a podcast, I was like infuriated, just like, because it's like so simple. It's such a simple concept. Why are police not being allowed to do their jobs? They get in trouble for doing their jobs. And we see that now. An example you gave, and I've worked, back before, graduating college and getting my degree, you do what you got to do to make money while you're putting yourself through school. And, I worked retail and whatnot. And one of the things that we're told is if someone walks in and just goes to swipe your stuff, you don't do anything. And you just see it happen. And it happens all the time because, we're being told as employees, just let it happen. Just let it happen.
Yep.
And it's so frustrating. And I can see why people are like, why aren't the police doing their job? And it's like, sometimes it's the same people reoffending.
If they're allowed to do it, if they're allowed to do it, they're going to do it. That's how simple it is. And the point I wanted to make before was about numbers. So it happens all the time. There'll be in New York City, but it happens all across the country, okay, where politicians, okay, and even in the New York City Police Department, once you're past captain, it becomes a very political world, okay? And they can fudge numbers to make their precinct or their borough or whatever look better than it actually is. So they can take robberies and make them larcenies. Okay. You can take a rape and make it a sexual assault. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You can make different things different on the paperwork. You can't hide the bodies. You see what I'm saying? So if
Yeah.
those numbers are down, if there's less homicides, that is always a good barometer. If you see, you're thinking about moving to another state or another city or visiting, whatever, check the homicide rate. If the homicides are high, you don't want to be there. It's that simple. Okay. And when I say that, I'm not bashing other cities because every city's got good parts and bad parts, but it's a good barometer of what's going on, if you will. Okay. And yes, so back to your point right there, what's happening now is, yes, you go into what did California do? They had no larcenies under $900. I can steal $899 worth of stuff, and I'm not going to be arrested. That is beyond stupid to me.
Yeah.
Okay. Or here in New York, there's a lot of things that need to be reformed in general. Things always need to be fixed, tweaked. You got to work through that. But when you do things like the bail reform, there's a character that we had running around the city, New York City, who at the time, the last time I saw him on TV, he had done over a dozen bank robberies. Okay? Never hurt anybody. It was always passing the note robberies, okay? But he was on the news waving, ha, 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 I'll see you guys next week, because he's literally going to be out tomorrow. And next week, they're going to grab him, because how could he not walk in there, slip a note, get $3,000 to $5,000, walk out? He's going to do it again and again because he's not going to go to jail. And he's not afraid. He's got nothing to lose. What do you expect? What do you expect? And it should infuriate everybody, But we'll see it time and time again where you have, from your municipality to the whatever city, town, whatever you live in, a soft on crime approach, up to the state level, up to the federal level, soft on crime, so you're going to get more crime. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
If you're hard on crime, you're going to get less crime. It's math. It really is very, very simple math.
So what do you see now? So for officers, who are, or people who are, that's what they want to be now. They want to do good in the world, and they're entering this field thinking they will be able to do that good, but now their hands are tied.
Sure. Well, that's why nobody takes a job anymore. In my day, and again, I'm going to go back, in my day, so I'll go back 40 years ago when I was taking my test, okay? And, oh God, or more. I hate to say that. It's actually been more. When I was taking my test, though, the test would come out like every 4 years, every 5 years, they'd have a new test. And literally 30, 40,000 people would take that test. And it was a one-day test, and you go to different high schools all over the city, okay? And there'd be a line going down the entire block, and you get in, and you get in your classroom, and you take your test for your whatever it was, 2 or 3 hours, and you'd be done. And they would hire the top 10%. Well, the top 10% of the written test would go on to the medical exam and the psychological exam. You see, it would be, exam after exam after exam. So you were always taking the top 10% of the written exam who would move on, and it would whittle away down.
Yeah.
So you had a pretty decent bunch of people taking the test, okay? Now, and we're not going to get into, we can get into lowering the standards and all that kind of nonsense, and it's a separate thing. But for this right now, because absolutely nobody takes the test anymore, New York City has an open exam. You just got to go sign up for the test, and they'll give it to you next week because nobody takes it. They have like 700-800 people applying instead of 40,000.
Wow.
Do you see?
That speaks volumes.
And now so many people are leaving. And this is the scary, scary thing to me. At my time, when I was in, we had about 38,000 people. They're down to about 26,000, and they're afraid they're going to be below 25,000. Those numbers have never, in my lifetime, it's never been that low. as far as people. But the bad part is, we talked in the very beginning of the show. I said how Tommy Keanne was going to retire after 20 years, as most guys do. But many, many, many people I know stayed for 25, stayed for 30, stayed for 35. They loved the job. They loved what they were doing. They had kids in college. They wanted to hit the next tier for retirement. Whatever their reasons were, everybody has their own. Okay. Mm-hmm. But like any job, it's the guy that's been around for 25 years that knows the most, especially in the detective bureau. So you have literally the greatest detectives in the world working in New York City. All right. And what happens? They're all leaving. Who is going to take that knowledge and give it to the new people? When I got there, I was a sharp kid. I was smart. I was streetwise. I was a New York City guy. I still had to learn how to be a cop. And the older, good cops are the ones that I learned off of. The real meat, the stuff they don't teach in the academy, how things really work. And then when you become a detective, they open your eyes to, wow, all these really cool investigation techniques, how to do this, how to look for that. This guy's got a gun. He's got drugs. You got to look here, here, and here. Who's going to tell them? It's got to be the guy that tells them that's got the experience, And all of those guys are leaving. They leave at 20 years. They leave the second they can get out, because it's not worth, you take away a qualified immunity, which a lot of people may not know what that is. That means qualified immunity is not immunity for anything that I do wrong. Okay. If I do something criminal, I'm still a criminal. And believe me, they will find out and they will fire me and put me in jail, because nobody goes to jail for doing wrong more than cops. That's a fact. Okay. Because they have to prove their point. Qualified immunity is, we're out there and something terrible happens. I didn't want something bad to happen, but if something bad happens, the city needs to indemnify me, or else I'm never getting out of the car.
Right.
I will literally never get out of the car and this is what's happening now, they take away qualified immunity. Guys aren't going to get out of the car. Why am I going to put my life at risk, which we do because we're stupid, all right? And then now I'm going to put my career at risk, my pension at risk, everything I've worked for at risk. And then it allows the victims to sue me personally and if I have a home, take my home that my wife and kids live in. So no, I'm not getting out of the car. You know what? Kill each other. When it's all done, we'll mop up the mess. And that's the attitude they have. And I'll tell you what, as distasteful as that is, you can't blame these guys.
Right.
And it's disgusting. When I say distasteful, it embarrasses me. I'm ashamed of what I see going on, but I cannot blame them. All right. Because it's self-preservation. That's what it comes down to,
Yeah. Oh gosh. That's just so frustrating. It's so frustrating to hear that. And I mean, it's no secret that where I'm from, Boston has a long history of, cop corruption and whatnot. And
well, that's the thing there too. Let's talk about corruption for a second, okay? So, did you ever see it's a great documentary. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend you watch it, called The 7-5, and all your listeners or watchers should watch it too. It's about a gang of corrupt cops in Brooklyn in the end of the 80s, okay? This was our time. We got beaten to death with this when it happened. And the Mullen Commission was the commission that had done all the studies afterwards and put everything together. And they had decided that less than 1% of the New York City Police Department was corrupt. Okay? So, to put that into context, though, okay? Because people are people and humans are humans. And, there's plenty of asshole douchebags in everything. The only thing is, we're talking about the police now, okay? Who have a lot of power. So, if it's 1%, we'll go with the full 1% are corrupt. 1% of 38,000 guys, it's over 3,000 guys. You see? Mm-hmm. So, I do believe that even in Boston, the corruption is minuscule, but it doesn't matter because it only takes, right back to the bad neighborhood thing, it only takes 10% to ruin everything.
Right.
And if you have 1% of the department, I have no idea how big the Boston Police Department is. Let's say it's 1,000 guys, just for math's sake. Okay. So we're agreeing in comparison to New York, Boston's a very small city. I know it's a major city, but
right.
Okay. So let's say they have 1,000 guys. Okay. 1% is up to no good, be it very no good or a little bit no good. No good is no good. Okay. Well, that's still close to 100 guys. And you can't have 100 guys running around the streets with shields and guns doing bad things. And that's why you have, internal affairs officers are out there chasing them down, getting them. They do get caught. They get caught all the time, and it's all over the news, and they lose their jobs, and they go to jail, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It does happen. But to think that departments, when you hear, corrupt, I was in at that time. We had the Dirty 30. We had the 7-5 guys. There's always something that gets caught. I personally have never seen a true act of corruption my time on the job. There were people that maybe I didn't trust, I didn't like. Absolutely. Now, if you're going to tell me that when I go see Dave DeGreek on Fordham Road selling hot dogs, and he gives me a free soda, that I'm corrupt, lock me up. He refused to take my dollar. I'm sorry. Okay. But I'm talking about true corruption. I'm talking about robberies. I'm talking about, robbing DOAs or drug dealers or things of this nature. And nobody hates a corrupt cop more than a cop. And that's a fact. We hate it because it ruins it. It ruins it for everybody else. It really does. So.
Yeah. Matilda says, can you please repeat the name of the documentary? Thank you.
Oh, the 7-5.
The 7-5. Thank you. But I have to say, Matilda is like, anytime something's recommended, she's like, I'm on it.
I got another favorite for her then, just because it popped in my head. Okay. If she can find it, watch, just for an old New York thing. This really has nothing to do with the police department, called Rumble Kings.
Rumble Kings.
Rumble Kings. And it's a great picture of the Bronx in the 70s.
Okay.
Good. In fact, for your listeners, anybody that remembers the movie The Warriors, which was a very popular movie in the 70s, okay, that movie is all based off of one true incident that happened in the Bronx in the 1970s. And the Rumble Kings actually, it's like, 2-hour documentary, but there's one sliver of it that touches on the true incident that the Warriors were invented from. So.
Good to know. Thank you. So there's a few things from New York history that I do want to touch upon, but one of them that, and I know we're kind of going to be going back in history now, but I'm just very fascinated to hear your take on it, because, you were there in New York at this time, and you mentioned it earlier, it was in New York, like the 80s crack epidemic.
Yes.
What was that like from your perspective? Where were you in your career when that happened?
Well, we were throughout the 90s, we were still in the thick of it, in the Bronx. Drugs were insane. And then back to Mayor Giuliani, he had several drug initiatives, okay, which, I went to narcotics with only 4 years on the job, which is very, very young on the job to get started with it. Same with my friend, the guy I mentioned before, well, many of us that happened, because it expanded. Bronx Narcotics we had like 350 officers in Bronx Narcotics. It was the largest command in the Bronx, where a regular precinct would have 180 guys, maybe 200 guys, depending on how physically large the precinct was. Bronx Narcotics was, almost twice as big as a precinct, but we covered the entire Bronx. And the whole idea was to get the drugs off the street. And so it was crazy. Now, when it kicked off, it's like anything. Things kind of snowball out of control all of a sudden, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah.
So when I first heard about crack at all, I don't know, it was in the mid 80s. I was still in the Army. I got out of the Army in 86. Okay. And I had come home and there was this thing called crack. And every once in a while you heard somebody was doing it, or somebody turned into a crackhead, and you're like, what is this crack shit? I didn't know what it was, and nobody really did. And here's an interesting thing, okay? So in our neighborhood in Yorkville, on 86th Street, okay, and I'm going to get maybe a little graphic or dark, if you will, okay?
Go ahead.
86th Street. I'll give you a little. Another little history lesson for you. So, have you ever heard the expression "to 86 something"?
No, I haven't.
Okay, when you throw something out, like waitresses use it a lot. 86 to fries. Okay, so in other words, I'm going to get a burger, but 86 of fries, no French fries. Okay, and if you get thrown out of a bar, okay, if you get thrown out of a bar, you're thrown out. If you're never allowed to come back, you're 86th. So you're 86 from the bar. That comes from decades and decades back in the 30s, 40s, whenever it was. Okay, when you were thrown out of every bar in the nice neighborhood that you lived in, you would go and drink on 86th Street. Because they would let anybody in to the pubs on 86th Street. That was the 42nd Street. You're familiar with 42nd Street and what it used to be back in the day, right?
Can you explain it?
Okay, so 42nd Street was basically the illegal red light district of New York City.
Okay,
and that's where all the prostitutes, all the X-rated movies, all kinds of drugs, all kinds of vice took place in Times Square, and predominantly on 42nd Street was the main drag, even though it went a couple of blocks in each direction.
Okay.
So to a much less extent, 86th Street was our 42nd Street. And when I was a kid, you could still see prostitutes. I'm talking when I was a young child, okay? Prostitutes like they looked in the movies, where they had the short rabbit fur coats and short skirts and high heels, and the pimps would really have the big hats and the fur coats, really ridiculous 1970s stuff that came from reality, okay? And prostitutes actually were, put it on. They tried to be attractive. And then come the end of the 80s, there were no more streetwalkers that looked like that anymore. Okay, not that that's a good thing or a bad thing. Prostitution is always bad and sad, and it's a really horrific way to live your life. There's nothing good about it. But that's when the crack whores, that word, crack whores, had took over, because they were such bad junkies that now when a girl could get, $50, $100 for oral sex or a trick or, whatever they could get, now a girl's going to do it for $5 because she's so desperate for that next vial of crack, you see? Yeah. And she's literally going to get in a car with 20 or 30 men that night, and every penny she makes is going to go to crack. And eventually her teeth are going to rot out of her head, and she's just going to be a filthy, awful, terrible mess. And if you want a really terrible story, I'll tell you one.
Go ahead.
Okay. So, and you can relate this to our friends who have read our books or do read our books, because I fictionalized this story in the beginning of the fourth book, Lee June. So when you read that prologue, this is the true story. All right?
Okay.
Not that I want to ruin anybody's reading in the future. I was home from the Army with a good friend of mine named Van Gerald at the time. Okay. And as we would, because it always was good for us when we would come home, we went out in uniform, because bartenders would hook us up with free drinks. People would buy us free drinks. All the girls wanted to talk to us, two young, handsome paratroopers home on leave, right? And he was a nice kid from North Carolina, so I'm showing him my neighborhood, and we're walking around. And we left the bar, and I don't want to get misty, but I might get a little misty, all right? So don't let me do that. We had left the bar on 85th Street and 2nd Avenue called Fitzpatrick's. And that bar is no longer there, but we're going to walk down one block to Ryan's Daughter, which still exists today, on 85th and 1st. And when we left, this prostitute, crack whore, if you will, okay, was calling from us from behind, hey, you want a date? Hey, soldier boy, you want a date? You want a date? Because, you want a date means you want a trick. Can I do something for you? All right. And, I'm street kid, New York City kid. I'm used to this. I'm not paying her any mind. I'm ignoring her. And my friend Van is like, does this happen every day? What's going on here? Because he was from North Carolina, not used to the ways of New York City. I turned around, and it was a girl that I grew up with. And she looked me right in the face, and she didn't know who I was. All right. And I took $20 out of my pocket. And I put it in her hand, kind of like that kind of tight thing like this. And I gave her $20. And I said, go get something to eat. And then she was insulted. You don't know me. You don't know me. She's yelling and cursing at me, and she never recognized me, you know? And that absolutely broke my heart. And that is a true story. Okay. And crack destroyed people. It destroyed people's lives. They became desperate animals. And I'm not exaggerating with that. And if you ever meet an ex-crackhead, the ones that have survived, I mean, true people that were buried in it, I mean, literally, how can a human being not bathe for weeks at a time? Because it's just hit after hit after hit after hit after hit. That's their life, and you see it with meth. Now, meth was never big in New York City, but meth destroys people. And it destroys people so much that I've read this, and I when I throw this quote out there, I don't know what the facts are, but look it up yourself, where places like Kentucky and Tennessee and in places where meth took hold rather than crack, because crack was very, very strong in New York City. Meth never really got in, to my knowledge anyway. In my experience, we never dealt with meth. But meth had taken such a toll on some of these communities that they had to close the hospitals. Entire hospitals that served entire communities went out of business because they could not keep up with not only the meth addicts, but the burn victims, because when they would cook it, their trailer or house would explode and set 4 or 5 or 6 people on fire. And it would take literally $3 million to save this one person's life. But now you're doing that a dozen times a year. And it would destroy the hospitals. There's a guest to get on. Get somebody to come on and explain that nonsense to you. Hospitals, entire hospitals would go out of business that served the community, that where babies were born, where you went to the emergency room, would go out of business because of the meth epidemic in some of these rural towns and these rural communities, and they couldn't afford it. Drugs are so insidious. It's such an awful thing. And again, it's the base, back to our prior conversation, to all the other crime.
Right.
Marijuana, people say, personally, I'm 50-50 on the marijuana being legal thing, okay? In that I really don't care if anybody smokes marijuana. I never lock people up for marijuana. I don't think it's a bad drug per se. And truthfully, alcohol is more destructive than marijuana, okay?
Yeah.
But what happens with marijuana, okay, is that like any other drug when sold illegally, which it still is, even in your state in Massachusetts or my state here in New York where it's legal, most marijuana is still illegally sold, purchased, moved around. And I can tell you a dozen stories of dead bodies, because the different drug gangs would kill each other over the corner that they're going to sell marijuana at, or would kill each other over robbing not nickel bags, but pounds of marijuana. Marijuana, if you're, and I don't want to guilt anybody, but if you think, oh no, I'm just a casual guy, I smoke a little bit on the weekend, blah, 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 blah. I tell you what, somebody died to get you that joint. And that's a statistical fact. Okay. If you are a regular smoker, okay, of marijuana for years, I'm talking about people, old guys, 60-year-old guys like myself, who've been around forever. All those joints you smoked, I promise you, there is a body, if not many bodies, attached to all that marijuana you smoked over the years. It's fact. Doesn't make you a bad person. Understand that. But people don't understand just the whole way it got. You want to get crazy with politics. Talk about your Nike sneakers that are sewn by slaves in China. It's the world's an upside down place. It really is.
That's an understatement. So, oh my gosh, there's just so much to that. And it just kind of goes back to, in my mind, it just goes back to, again, like I don't want to say your generation, because that makes you sound older than you are, but you guys being allowed.
It is my generation. I'm
And
sorry. Go
then
ahead.
where we're back now to.
I talked over you a little bit there. I'm sorry. What did you ask or say?
Oh no, I'm sorry. In my mind it goes back to, before, when cops weren't allowed to do their job, and then, what Giuliani put in place to do your job, and then how it's like back to square one again.
But that's the part that really, for in the cop world, in our little subculture that we have, okay, and the guys that I know, okay. And when I say this, now that I'm in this whole crime world with crime kind of stuff, I'll meet guys from Florida or from Dallas or from Los Angeles or whatever. We'll talk the same thing. Because in that stretch of time, New York City, that CompStat thing spread across the country. Major cities all over the country took a page from our notebook and put those practices in place. In Dallas, for instance, I just mentioned that Dallas had a crackerjack police department. Los Angeles had a really good police department. And the naysayers will ruin it with one or two bad incidents that happen and make them sound corrupt or too violent or too this or too that. But in the end, we again are the lowest rung on the ladder. Okay. We are the guys in the trenches who are doing the dirty, dirty work. In fact, I've said this many times, so I don't want to be boring to any of my listeners that might be listening here. I don't even know why they call the police law enforcement. Okay. Because we, the guys in the street, we don't get to enforce shit. All right. The courts do the enforcing. We just grab the bad guys. We are truth seekers. We try in a matter of very few seconds to figure out what the truth is to our best judgment. Okay. And, snatch up the bad guys. If we have probable cause, which again is our best judgment. All right. Hand it off to the courts, and then the courts decide to prosecute and or not prosecute. It's really all up to the courts. And even the courts don't, because the courts, again, the district attorney's office has to present it to a judge. Okay? And the things that people don't see that would really infuriate you, and I'm sure you're aware of this and your listeners are aware of it, are the things that are never brought up in court. The damning things that happen. You said you watched all the podcasts. Did you watch the one with Michelle Horton with her sister, Nikki Armando?
Yes.
Right?
That was horrifying.
Now, in that case, in my personal opinion, there were no winners there at all. Okay? At all. Everybody lost, and on her end too, no, you're not supposed to be shooting people regardless of what they do to you. That's a whole nother story. But in the end, my point, if all of that evidence had been presented to the jury properly, I would have been on Nikki's side. I would have been on Nikki's side out of spite, Yeah. I couldn't believe that was not presented to the jury. And that happens all the time. I would lock up, really, really heinous, awful criminals who had a record as long as your arm, who've done this again and again and again. But when you go to jury, it's about this case, not what he did last time. Even though it's the same man, it's the same criminal doing it again, but it can't be given to the jury because it will taint. You see, past crimes will taint their view of this crime, So that's got nothing to do with reality or justice. Personally, I don't believe there's injustice. I don't think justice is a thing. So, no.
So I want to be respectful of your time. I know we're coming off near an hour and a half.
If you keep asking me questions, I'm going to keep answering. I can go on forever. So don't worry about me.
So switching gears a bit in regards to New York, and then I just have a couple of questions after that. But one of the things so you were in New York during 9/11.
Yes, I was.
What was that like for you? Like, where were you? Were you working that day? I would just love to hear it from your perspective, from a native New Yorker who had to go through such a tragedy.
So I had actually retired. I was injured a little bit more than a year before then. Okay. And that was the injury that ended my career. And I, what do you call it? So I had retired just months before 9/11 happened, maybe like 8 months prior, something like, I'm not sure exactly when it was. So I left the job. Okay. And on that particular day, I was actually doing I was working for a company that I was working security for a company that made music videos and TV commercials. And we were doing a Chrysler commercial that day, and I had done an overnight thing. So I was done at like 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning when the crew showed back up. And I was driving home, and I was, listening to cassettes, back in the day when you used to have a cassette that you put in your
Oh
car.
gosh,
Was
yes.
listening to music on the way home, and I drove up the side of New Jersey, and traffic was really bad, but I just expected it to be bad because traffic is always bad where we live, right? And I got home, and I went right to bed because my kids were already in school. And I got up about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And again, back then, I didn't have a cell phone. I had the old phone hanging on the wall, and the blinker was going on and off, on and off and off. And I looked, and I had like 30 messages on my phone. I was like, what the hell is this? And it was all people calling to check in, friends from all over the country, guys I was in the service with. What's going on? I'm like, what's going on? Put the TV on, and I'm like, holy cow, what is going on? My wife, I get my kids off the school bus at 3 o'clock. My wife comes home from work, and I said, I have to go, honey. That's it. And so I packed a bag, and I went down to New York City. And it took me a little while to get down there because it was all shut off. Everything south of 14th Street was shut off. You couldn't get in, but I still had, my police identification. And I actually got a ride with a truck full of National Guard guys, an Army truck full of National Guard guys. And I hopped in the back of that, and they took me down to Battery Park City. Battery Park is a big park that's at the very bottom of New York City, right next to the Twin Towers. Okay. And that's where the ferry goes across the Staten Island back and forth. And so I spent the next 5 days at Ground Zero. And I could tell you a very long story. In fact, I was on if anybody wants to look at it, there was another podcast called the 500 Section Lounge, where we talked about this subject for 2 hours. Okay. And I told my entire 9/11 story there. But I get down there, and it's an absolutely insane scene. In the park, it was all quiet. I walked for the first couple of blocks with dust that was up over my ankles. That was, from Ground Zero and everything that happened. And I got there, and I went to the THV, which is a temporary headquarters vehicle. Usually it's kind of like a big camper like a trailer, that they drive all around. There's always THVs for every St. Patty's Day, they have a THV. They drive it around for all the big things, right? I went in there, and there was a lieutenant, and I identified myself. I said, I'm here to help you out, whatever you need. And I looked at it, and I'd been to funny, I had never, every time I'd ever gone to the Twin Towers, I used to go there when I delivered liquor. I had never been to the top. I lived there my whole life. When I was a young kid, I lived on 11th Street. I could see it. I could look down the avenue. I could see the Twin Towers. I never went there. And here I am, and it's all down, and it's a big mess of twisted metal. It's about midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning when I show up. And but there was a funny thing about it that was kind of beautiful, in that there were literally a thousand, if not thousands, of people crawling all over that, trying to help people. Flashlights going, construction guys with the things on their hat with the lights on, people just looking all over the place. And the lieutenant that was in charge there, I said, I'm here. I'll be here as long as you need me. He says, well, I don't need you here. As you can see, we got 1,000 guys carrying buckets, And I went to the old Brooks Brothers. If you don't know what Brooks Brothers is, it's a men's clothing store, but it's for like Wall Street guys. It's money guys. It's, fine menswear. And they had a little store, a shop right across the street from the World Trade Center that we used as a temporary morgue. And that's where we would bring the bodies. And there were several volunteers. One of them was a doctor. One of them was a nurse, a very nice young lady from Staten Island that would go back, that came over on the ferry. And there was nobody responsible, nobody professional in our realm, if that makes sense. I'm not knocking anybody when I say that. Obviously,
Right.
If you're a doctor, you're an intelligent guy because you're a doctor. But they didn't know how to do things our way. So what I did for the next 5 days was I cataloged, I searched everybody, I searched bodies. We processed 86 bodies, okay, in our morgue. There were 4 temporary morgues. We were one of the 4. And we processed 86 bodies. Okay. Remember, there was, thousands of people died.
Right.
Most of them there was nothing recovered. When people say all these people were saved, they recovered nothing. It was all incinerated. Everything was gone. Out of those 86 bodies, only 1 body was a true body. And it was a young Spanish woman who was probably hit in the head with debris because she was not incinerated or burnt in any way. She still had all her hair and everything like that. She was probably hit with something. Okay. Everything else was pieces and parts and, a leg, an arm, half a torso, whatever it could be, just bits and pieces. And the firemen and the construction guys and all. Let me give a little credit here to this. Okay. The firemen get a lot of credit. The police departments get a lot of credit. People don't realize how many other people were there. All of the construction guys, all the iron workers, all the EMT medical type people. There was an army of people there doing every different facet of work. Okay. And nobody ever talks about them. They always want to pat the firemen and the cops on the backs. Not that we didn't do a lot of shit, but nobody thinks of the other guys.
Right.
It wasn't cops and firemen cutting through all that steel or working the giant, pieces of equipment to move all that stuff out of there. And we were all there. We were all doing it. So yeah, so for my time in there, to make this a short story for you, for 5 days, I processed everything. And I would just write everything down in a notebook, literally handwrite everything in a notebook, brown corduroy pants, black shoes, wedding ring, whatever it was, because you never know what's going to be used either in a court of law later on and or for identification purposes later on, and some things we get were completely, we didn't know what they were. They were literally, they would pick stuff up and put it in a black garbage bag and it would be organs and things and stuff that we didn't know what it was. The doctors didn't even know what it was, It's just parts, things, and that's what I did for the first 5 days. And then that's when the feds took over, believe it or not. It took them a little while to get their act together. And back to back to Mayor Giuliani, where people, this was the end of his career, not his career, the end of his time as mayor. And he actually stayed on and helped Bloomberg at that time because that's when the transition had happened. Ooh, and what was I going to say about that? He was the man with the plan. He was very good at organizing everybody and putting everything together and making sure that it ran as smoothly as it did. And it did run, as chaotic as it was, it ran amazingly smoothly, and, but as far as, if you hear stories or watch movies and things about people being saved, nobody was saved. It was all over. It was all over the day it happened, and sadly, what people don't think of enough, people do think of it. People realize it. We lost whatever it was. I don't know what the exact number is, 3,000, whatever people that day, combined between all the different events that happened on that day. Well, we've lost like over 5,000 from the people that breathed in all that shit. Guys that I used to work with, dropped dead of cancer, and I want to say I know for a fact I've been to over 11 funerals for that, but I've probably been to close to 15 or 16. And I know that I will be to more, and hopefully, God willing, I won't go from that because you never know what's going to sneak up on you,
Right.
And some very, very dear friends of mine, if you remember, there was a fella that sat, here's a sad story for you. Jon Stewart did a whole thing. You may have remembered him being in front of Congress when Jon Stewart. Yeah, you remember that. And he sat next to a detective who testified. Okay. And I had watched that detective testify because it was all over the news at the time. This was something that I don't want to say I was interested in. It was part of my life. I had to pay attention.
Yeah.
I probably saw that man at least 5 times on television before I realized that I knew him. His name was Luis Alvarez. I knew him before we were cops. We were friends. We hung out together. We worked at different bars and nightclubs together. We would go down to the Jersey Shore together. He was a dear friend of mine, and that cancer ate him up so bad that I didn't recognize him on TV. I'm so ashamed to say that, because it wasn't my Louis. That was not my friend. The cancer ate him down to nothing. He was a beautiful, strong young man, and he was overnight. He was 80 years old,
Wow.
and it was just so god awful and heartbreaking. And so, that's a little taste of what my 9/11 thing. I mean, if you want more, I can go on, but that's the gist of it. So yeah, I was there for 5 days. And it changed. It's funny when we talk about 9/11, I've done it a couple times. And if anybody's interested in my story, please do go to, we actually reposted it with the the Nobody thing. You can watch it on the the Nobody podcast. You can also watch it on the 500 Section Lounge, because those were the guys that did it. And when I started my own thing, I said, I got a channel. You mind if I put this on there? And they said, please do whatever you want with it. And I put it up there. I never really spoke. I'm not a public figure. Again, I'm a nobody, right? But that was the first time I ever spoke publicly. I never told my wife about it. I never told my sister about it. Even my brother, who was another cop, he knew I was there, and we all had our own experiences. But it's stuff that we don't really talk about because we don't.
Yeah.
That was that. But one of the things that I like to say, especially in this ridiculous political climate that we're in right now, okay, with all of this bullshit that people want to do, full of hating the left or hating the right and hating each other and hating the president and hating the Congress and hating the Senate and hating your neighbor. There was nothing better than September 12th, where everybody was proud to be an American and everybody loved one another and everybody worried about each other. Crime went down in New York City for weeks after 9/11 because everybody was just so tired of what had happened and so shocked and so broken,
Mhm.
And if it happened in New York City, I'm sure it happened all over the country,
Yeah.
because we did very, very, very much come together for a brief period of time, a brief
Yeah.
period of time. So
It's so incredible and it's so unfortunate that it takes something so horrific to then make people really realize
sure.
what's really important, and everything else is just bullshit. And
Yep.
to have that come together moment, and especially, I mean, for you to drive there and say, how can I help, and
Honey, there were people from all over
be
the
part
world
of
that
the
showed up.
solution, wanting to do the right thing.
Yes. And we had people, forget about me driving down. This is my city, and I was going. That was it. I could not go. But I'm standing there doing the morgue thing, right? Going through these bodies, whatever. A ambulance showed up and asked me what they should do. Like I had any saying anything, what they should do. That ambulance came from Canada. Not only did it come from Canada, they left without permission. They were working and they just drove to New York.
Wow.
How crazy is that? Crazy in a beautiful way.
Right.
They're like, yeah, we're going to get fired. We're going to get yelled at, whatever. New York City needs an ambulance right now. That was their mentality, and they drove right down.
Yeah.
Phenomenal, and so many people did that kind of. That girl I had mentioned before that came from Staten Island, she was she was a nurse. She was threatened by the hospital that she worked for because she didn't go back to work for the 5 days that I was there. And the hospital's like, honey, you got to come to work. This is your job, And we had a girl that was there. This is a touching story. It was a girl and her boyfriend showed up. And she was very, very young, and he was very young too. And when I say young, they were literally like 19 years old. Okay. They came across the ferry. And when they got to the Manhattan side, whoever the police or whoever, I don't know, sent them back. We don't need you. We don't want you. Closed area, blah, 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 blah. They went home and they put on, her mother was a nurse. They put on her mother's scrubs. They came back across, they tried again. They came back the second time. They saw they were in scrubs. They let them in. And they came and worked with us for like 2 or 3 of those days in the morgue. And they had zero experience. They had nothing, but they were there and they helped pick up bodies and move bodies and clean things and touch all kinds of god awful, filthy things. And they breathed in all that shit that we were breathing, okay, because they had to be there. It was in their heart to be there, and they could not be there. So much so that not only did they get turned away, but they went home, put on, they stole scrub, or stole, asked, I don't know, they took her mother's scrubs, and he was dressed in woman's scrubs, and she was dressed in woman's scrubs, and they came back, and they got in, and they slept on the floor with us in Brooks Brothers and helped catalog dead bodies. And that's what they did for the first 2 or 3 days that they were there, you know? So.
Yeah.
And,
That's just incredible. It's just heartwarming that it's just, yeah, situations like this, like as much as you see the horrible side of people, you see the best side of people at the same time.
well, when I was going home from there, we had moved out of the city. We lived in a town called Brewster, New York, which is about 45 minutes outside of the Bronx. Okay, it was our first ever home because my wife grew up in a housing project, and I grew up in a tenement building in Manhattan. And we got our house, the whole dream thing. We had children. We wanted to get them out of the city, et cetera, et cetera. So we did the stereotypical, working class guy thing and bought ourselves a little broken down haunted house in Brewster, New York. And so I'm going home and I'm taking the train up. And I had actually taken the bus with my mother up to Grand Central because she was working down in the Chelsea area. And I met her as I'm leaving, and I'm covered with this dust is all over. I'm filthy. It looked like I've been hanging sheetrock for the last 5 days and hadn't taken a bath. My clothes are just covered with, gray, white dust, my hair, all over my body. And so I get off the bus because she's going to continue north. I get over 42nd Street and I walk over to the thing, and there were some bad guys on the corner. When I say bad guys, I'm a policeman. I'm a detective. I know what a bad guy is, right? And, usually you get the snide look or the snotty look or the, they spit on the floor when you walk by, that kind of thing, right? Guy looks at me and he winks and he says, thank you, under his breath as I walk past him. Okay. Then I get in the train, and the train is crowded because now it's, after work crowd is going home from Manhattan. So the trains are packed. And usually the trains all the seats go in one way, except for the very first two, which face each other. Okay. And there's a woman sitting across from me. I'm sitting on the edge one here, even though I'm filthy. I got to sit down. I'm beat. I'm a beaten man. So I sit on the end seat here because one of them has 3 seats and the other one has 2. So it's kind of like a little, I don't need to describe that. Your listeners don't want to know what I'm talking about. So I'm sitting there and I'm just kind of leaning back like this. And there was a very, you could tell a posh, well-to-do Westchester woman going home from her job, wherever she worked, high-class lady. All right. She didn't say a word and she didn't look at me, but she reached across. Ooh, I'm sorry. She reached across and put her hand on my knee. And she held it there for 5 or 10 seconds. And it was nothing to it, right? But that gesture meant the world to me. It really did. It really did. And she couldn't say anything and she couldn't even look at me. But that's all right. And that was a beautiful thing. Back to that September 12th thing. Everybody gave a shit about everybody for a few weeks. From the bad guy to the very posh lady. And that was it's sad that we can't have that every day. And I don't know why we can't.
Yeah.
I don't know why we can't.
Matilda says, thank you, Travis, hero.
Oh, I'm no hero, honey. I'm no hero at all. I'm just, it had to be done. And, we people sign up for this stuff. It's in us to do it. And it had to be done. So,
yeah.
I'm not a fan of the hero word. I know people like to throw that around a lot, but we do what we do because we have to do it. Right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I stand there with Matilda. Thank you for doing what you did, and for everybody at that time
Yes.
that did what they did. That story about that girl and her boyfriend, like, that's incredible.
And that's a true story. That's a true story. And that to me is really beautiful. That girl, and there was another guy. I wish I could remember his name. I had his name. I had his card in my wallet for years afterwards, and eventually you empty stuff out. But for years I carried his card in my wallet, and I can't remember his name. He was a businessman from California. And he was there for a business meeting with whatever they were doing, big shot business stuff. He's staying in a hotel. And his entire group left to go back to Los Angeles or wherever he was from. And he stayed. And he ended up working with us too, And why are you, in my mind, I'm like, why are you here? He said, I couldn't not come down here. He couldn't do it, And, again, he was not a military guy. He was not a law enforcement guy. He was not a fire guy. He wasn't a medicine guy. He was a businessman that happened to be in New York City at the time, and he came down and volunteered. And it was a funny thing too, because not funny, but what people don't realize, at first it was wide open. There was nothing set up. It was such a big thing. Nobody knew what had happened. And people were walking in and out of the scene like anything. By the second day, they had everything, because they were so afraid of secondary attacks. Everything was roped off. So there were no longer volunteers allowed to come in unless you were a professional. But those people that showed up the very first people that showed up were all regular people, just like you, and they had to show up. They had to give. And those people are extra amazing to me. Like I say, guys like myself, we sign up for this stuff. We do stupid things. Being a policeman is a stupid job to have. It's a crazy job to have. We do stupid things. Firemen, running into a burning building is a stupid thing to do, Jumping out of airplanes is a stupid thing to do. It's in us to do this, be it a bravado or the necessity to serve. Some people have that. But when you have regular people that stand up because it has to be done, God, that's touching. It really is. A young 19-year-old girl, showing up. And think too, you think, oh yeah, how great she is. She may have lost her life from breathing that shit in. She may be gone now for all I know.
Right.
Because we were all in the same boat. We were all breathing that same stuff in, People don't think about that. And it happens all the time. It just happened. Look at all the nonsense with these hurricanes down in tornadoes in North Carolina, where our government abandoned them. FEMA abandoned them. Yeah. All those poor people, their houses washed into rivers, destroyed, knocked off of mountains, homeless in the wintertime, for Christ's sake. And our government did not go to help them. That is shameful. But common Americans, common, regular, working people got together and did it. I watched the whole thing with these guys. I wish I could remember. Shame on me, so I could mention them on your show. Phenomenal guys that have like these organizations where they have boats and trucks and the Amish. Did you hear about the Amish that went down there?
No.
A whole army of Amish came from Pennsylvania or New York or something like that. And those fuckers work, man. They built like 5 bridges in like 2 or 3 weeks because they would come with 100 guys and they would build these things out of the goodness of their heart. They don't get paid for that. It costs them to do it.
Yeah.
These guys that show up with these boats and giant trucks and pieces of equipment, they're doing it just out of the pure goodness of their heart because our government failed us.
Yeah.
And we can go on and on about that. They have the same thing all the way back to Katrina when that happened. So much of that work was done by civilians.
Yeah.
Heartbreaking.
We have another. So Wolf says, in regards to you, feel that he is a hero too.
Well, thank you, Virginia Wolf. Thank you.
So thank you for sharing all of that. I mean, the horrific that happened that day, with, the community that came together, like all those like individual stories of just people doing good. It's just, there's just so much to that. And yeah, if people do want to hear your full interview, can you just say one more time where they can find that?
Absolutely. Well, I tell you, we have it up on our thing, but please go visit the guys, the 500 Section Lounge. Okay, they're great guys. They're three guys. They do a fun little. They're more a fun podcast. I'm probably the worst, most darkest guy they had on their show because I get on there and tell them terrible stories, you know. But they're really good fellas. Please go watch them there. And if you happen to be on the Another Nobody, both of these are on YouTube. 500 Section Lounge and or the Another Nobody thing. I have it on my thing too, but it's just a replay of their show. Okay, and that's like just 2 hours of 9/11, and basically a lot of the stuff I just repeated to you, but again, they just get a little bit more in detail there
Yeah,
if that's something that they care to listen.
absolutely. I'll be absolutely checking that out for
All
sure.
right. All right.
So to just kind of wrap things up on a bit of a lighter note. So what I know you talked earlier about your book series and that hopefully book 6 and 7 will be out this year. Are
We
there
hope so.
any other upcoming projects that people can look forward to from you?
No, not I mean, the books are the big thing, you know. We have this new podcast now, does not include my sister, but I say us because it's like kind of our thing, you know, which is now weekly. It comes out every Tuesday. Um, and I'm doing these very silly. If you go on actually, I should mention it's Four Boston's. Four Boston's Media is the channel. Okay. And there's another podcast I'll mention called Desperately Seeking the 80s. And these girls turned me on to this. Okay. It's two girls and they talk about New York City in the 80s. And it's kind of half crime, half fashion, or I'm not sure, you know, current events of the 80s. And they're very, very cute. Okay. Meg and Jessica. And I love them dearly. So hopefully they'll pay attention to this, Meg and Jessica. And I've been on their show, I'll say 3.5 times because I've been on 3 times. And then I actually just told a story that they put the story on. Like the last 10 minutes of the show is me telling a story, right? But anyway, people seem to like to hear about old New York. And so we do these silly little shorts on YouTube where, you know, I'll tell you about my favorite candy that you don't find anymore, or about leather jackets that we used to wear, silly things like this. And it is the lighter side of the stuff that I do because unfortunately, and believe me, it's not me. I am a very positive, very lighthearted fella. All right. But it's you crime people that bring out the worst in me because you want to hear awful stories, awful stuff all the time, you know? So if you want something a little more lighthearted, when you're on the Four Boston's channel, you'll see me telling, you know, silly stories about, you know, Spalding bowls and Boston baked beans, candy, whatever it is, black and white cookies. That's what came out this week. So there's always something there if you want to check it out.
That sounds so cool. That actually sounds so cool. Oh my goodness.
But there's a lot of them on the way, so tune in.
Awesome. And you do have, I mean, I know we're only in April right now, but CrimeCon will be here before you know it, and you will be at CrimeCon this year, CrimeCon Denver.
Yes, I will. Yeah.
So everybody who is interested in going to CrimeCon, make sure you go to meet Travis. Again, Another Nobody podcast, and I'll be there too. So
we don't have much. We have CrimeCon, and then we have another thing called Monster Expo, which is a horror fest. Those are the only things on the calendar right now. And that, I believe, is New Hampshire. And I'm not sure what the date is. But if you're a horror fan, it's in New Hampshire. And I want to say July, but I'm not sure. So,
okay.
All right.
Okay. You said that very, very Boston, Monster.
Well, that's what it is. It's that's how they say it. It's Monster because it's New England.
Right? Oh, that's why.
It's
okay.
Monstah is how they spell it. Monster.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So it's Monster Fest is what it's called.
Oh, Monster Fest. Okay, my
Yeah, so
bad.
we'll have a booth at Monster Fest too, and it's the New Hampshire one because I think they do a Massachusetts one also. So
Okay. There I know some people that I think would be interested in that, so I'm gonna definitely pass that on
yeah,
for
please,
sure.
please.
Um, so we are a very pet friendly community here at Danny After Dark. My viewers know I'm an animal rescue. I have 6 cats, and the door's closed tonight because I don't want them jumping around and messing this up. But typically on my Friday night shows, I'll leave the door open so people will see my cats coming and going in the background, which I think they just tune in for the cats, not for me.
Yeah.
But with that being said, do you, Travis, have any pets?
Do I have pets? Do I have pets? Well, how could I say this? I know everybody out there, wherever they live, whatever city, town, neighborhood you live in, you have a crazy cat lady, right? Everybody knows a crazy, yeah, exactly, because you have several cats, right?
6.
Yes. So, well, I'm not beating up on you for being a crazy cat lady because my lovely bride, Christine, the love of my life, is the crazy dog lady. And we have 4 dogs. All right. And I love every one of those dogs with all of my heart. They're the most beautiful, beautiful Boston Terriers. If you're not familiar, Boston Terriers are the most amazing breed of dogs. All right. I love them, love them, love them to death. Out of the 11 dogs I've had in my life, 5 of them have been Boston Terriers. However, 4 Boston Terriers is a lot of dogs to have. And if it wasn't for me, my wife would have 10 of those fuckers running around. All right. They'd be all over the place. So, yes, I do have pets. I have 4 of them.
What are
And
their names?
well, the eldest is Rocket. All right. And in fact, he's on, well, hold on a second. I don't know if you can see this, it's too small. He's pictured on the back
Let
of our books
me
right there. Oh, look at that. That's Rocket right there sitting with me at the bar. All right. He's the oldest. And then after him comes Norton. All right. And after Norton comes Queenie. She's the only girl.
Oh,
And then we have Briggs. And they're all beautiful, just beautiful, beautiful animals. And we adore them. And they're spoiled. They're spoiled rotten. But we love them.
I love that. I love Queenie. I don't know. That
Yeah.
one's just
That's my girl, Queenie. So, and she's a honey. She's a lovey, lovey thing.
oh. So lastly, we've already talked about your podcast. So if people have not what's it called? Oh my gosh, subscribed. Have not subscribed yet, please do so. But social media wise, where can people find you?
Well, I have, part of being the old dinosaur that I am, I have had no social media whatsoever until I think I started my Instagram maybe in December because everybody kept telling me, you have to have a presence, you have to have a presence, you have to have a presence. Personally, I hate it. I hate it all. I started a MySpace back when MySpace first came out.
Oh,
I started that, and I think I was on it for like a half an hour. I said, I'm never doing this again. I hated it. And then because we had a couple of different businesses, we had Facebooks and things like that for business, but I never did anything that was mine. And now I have an Instagram. So it's another nobody TM on Instagram. It's the only thing that I do, but I put up updates not only for the podcast and or if I'm going to Crime Con or something of that nature, in the books, of course. But what people seem to like is I put up all old things from the 70s and 80s, and people really seem to love the nostalgia of that. So if you have any interest in Travis or the Tommy Keanne books or whatever it is, because all that's stolen from our lives anyway, take a look at that, and it'll give you a true taste of what New York City looked like and was like in the 70s and 80s, if you are so inclined.
yeah. I follow your page on Instagram, and it's a really cool page. So for someone who doesn't like social media, you're doing pretty good.
Well, you know what? I have to tell you that I don't hate it, but I'm also not doing 5 things. Like I know a lot of people have all the different things. I can't fit all of that in my head, but I also find that doing it, I can see why some people are attracted to it because I don't hate it. How's that? But I have kept it completely, I guess, me orientated, whatever that word is. I don't go for the political nonsense. I don't go for, the kind of crazy TikTok-y things. I post old photographs of myself. I give updates on the books. I give updates on the podcasts. And if you follow it, you can check me out. Check us out. So it's been pretty cool so far.
Awesome. James here. I was on TikTok for literally 5 minutes before deleting it.
Well, I can't bear to learn it, to tell you the truth. Well, it took me a while to figure out the TikTok thing. I'm not on TikTok. The Instagram thing, but I don't want to learn how to do Facebook, and I don't want to learn how to do TikTok. And I mean, there's a dozen others that they just keep coming up with new stuff, like Threads. I know they keep bothering me to be on Instagram. Bothers me to be on Threads. I don't want anything to do with it, but they keep sending me messages every day to join them. But
yeah. Well, you're doing good on Instagram, I will say. And everybody, again, if you are on Instagram, please give Travis give his page a follow. So
thank you very
much. And I did put your information as well in the drop down bar below, so people can check that out. So thank you, Travis, for coming on. We talked about an array of topics, and I mean, I would love to have you back again, because I know I'm sure there's a million other directions we could talk about it.
Well, anytime. I of the stuff that we're doing here now, this kind of podcasty thing, I really like it. I like meeting people and having interesting conversations and the feedback that we get. And so, yeah, you want me to come back on, I'll gladly come and talk to you anytime, Danny. And it was a pleasure meeting you, young lady. You're very, very nice. And thanks for inviting me on. I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Wolf says, great guest. Thank you, Travis and Danny.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you again, Travis, for being here. Again, all the information on where you can find him is in the drop-down bar below. We will definitely have Travis back, so stay tuned. And if after watching this, you're like, wait a minute, I got some questions for him based on what he said, keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. We'll have him back. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us. And remember, until next time, we don't live in darkness. Darkness lives in us. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.